Hello all and welcome to Brief Relief Training. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at the handout. There is the hypothetical on there. We'll also get to it. But the handout's really going to walk us through most of the content today. Real quick overview on the research process. This process applies to all research assignments, but specifically we're going to apply it to a brief in this case. So, big broad overview, we're going to start with those secondary sources that are not the law, but they explain the law in more simplistic layman's terms, if you will, and they're also going to lead us to the primary authority. The primary authority, of course, is the law. We're going to look at cases, statutes, administrative codes, and administrative materials. And then the last step is we're going to validate and expand. Shepardize the authority that we find to first make sure that it is in fact still good law, and secondly to ensure we have the most contemporary and authoritative authority by using the second reason that we shepardize, which is to expand. So secondary sources, they kind of really fall into two big buckets. To build that foundation, I like to focus on treatises and practice guides. So if it's a fairly new area of law that you're really just kind of trying to build that foundation on, we'll start here. If it's a more nuanced issue, very specific and niche, law reviews and journals can be a great resource if there's one on point. Then we're going to, of course, segue into that primary law. We're going to look first at statutes. And the reason I like to look at statutes first is because if we have common law and statute that says the same thing, statute's going to trump, but also the statute, we can just shepardize that, and then it will lead us to all the case law that refers back to that authority. We're going to take a look, of course, at the language, but also the case notes, and then see all of the cases that have interpreted and construed those statutes. Then we're going to jump on over to cases. It's really easy to kind of focus on the rule of law of the case, but the facts are really what's going to make us and break us on appellate brief researching, because we really want to find those fact patterns that are more similar to our case. If the answer was easy, this wouldn't be on appeal, right? So we really need to analogize and distinguish that case law using the facts to make the best legal analysis. And then lastly, we're going to jump on over to Shepard's to validate, make sure it's still good law, and then expand our authority. And really, I mean, Lexis and Westlaw, Coke and Pepsi, they really are very similar systems. There's a reason some firms have one, some have the other. You can basically do legal research on both. There are a few really important distinctions, though, and this second reason that you shepardize is one of those, expansion. So with Keysight, you have bad law, not bad law. But with Shepard's, you have bad law, not bad law, which is important for validation purposes. But then you have a third bucket, which is positive law. And what that means is not only has this not been overruled, not only is there no negative history, but some other case has followed it. And in the world of stare decisis and precedential value, that's really important. And that positive symbol is how we will expand from one piece of authority to find more contemporary or more authoritative by jurisdiction word on the topic. All right, so this is our fact pattern. Go ahead and take a look-see here or read it on your handout. Basically, daughter's taking FMLA leave to go with her mother to Las Vegas. She's been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and this is going to make her feel good. Her employer fires her for taking this leave. She filed suit at trial level. She won, and the employer has appealed that decision. So we've got our research plan. This is pretty easy, at least on the brief level, because our issues are already laid out for us, right? Like the issues we are going to appeal are pretty clear. Jurisdiction is clear. We just kind of need to develop our key search terms and take a look at some different resources. Couple of really important things on the front end, creating folders. Folders are going to be super clutch because those allow you to sort your research by secondary sources, primary, or if you want to do it by issues. It also allows you to annotate your documents. So let's say you find a great case for the standard of review. Perfect, right? But you can't remember what case it was. If you have annotated that document and put it in a folder, just said standard of review, you can then search for your annotation. So you can run a search through folders, searching for the terms that you have actually annotated those documents with. Alrighty, so there's this guy named Brian Garner, and he is the guru of all things legal writing. And this is his steps, his writing phase, if you will. Fact gathering, law gathering, organizing, drafting, know all the rules that apply, And then he really emphasizes revising and editing. So legal writing is very different than most types of writing, and that there is a real focus on succinctness, clarity, making it really easy for your reader to understand. Once you're all done with that, it's a really good idea to follow Herman's rules of style. And these are 10 quick kind of rules, if you will, that are great to read back over and edit with an eye towards each of these. I won't read them to save time, but especially for me, I am queen of the passive voice. So it's really important for me whenever I'm doing any legal writing to go back in and make sure that I have written everything in active voice. All right, when we get to discussing cases, again, remember your reader, and you don't want your reader to have to go out and read the case to understand why it's important. So when discussing a case, it's a great idea to set up kind of the procedural posture. Blank sue blank for something, trial court held blank, appellate court held blank, and then you say whatever it is that's important to you about that case, kind of setting it up for the reader. Now, when we have multiple cases we can choose from that kind of say the same content, not all cases are created equal. And the most helpful precedent that you can have is where the trial court did the opposite of what you wanted and the appellate court overruled. Perfect. That's best case scenario. The second most helpful case is when the trial court did what you wanted and the appellate court affirmed. And then the least most helpful thing, but sometimes it's all you have, is when it's simply discussed in dicta. And we actually have a tool that we're going to take a look at to help when that's the case as well. All right, and then take a break. And no one called DCS. Yes, this is my child in a dog kennel. She put herself there, I promise. But really, it is very important to take a break between drafting and writing. And with deadlines, it's really hard to do that, but it's really important. Otherwise, you're just going to read over your mistakes. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. And if you will notice on the handout, I actually call this SRAC. SRAC is kind of how I jump into material. So I start with my secondary sources, and then I statutes, regulations, administrative materials, and then cases. So SRAC is just a good formula to follow for that primary authority. So we're going to go ahead and pretend like we've already created our folders, but if you haven't, you can come here and do them, and then we can add all our documents there. And now what we're going to do is just start typing. And as you notice, when we say family and medical leave, we get a couple of different options. The one thing I want to highlight off the bat is these little Lexis questions or Lexis answers. So when you have like a basic question about something, what's the definition of Family and Medical Leave Act? You can come here, query the system, and it's going to create both a search on the back end so we can jump into the content, but also it gives you a really nice kind of answer card. This is the answer to your question. This is from where that information is derived. We're going to go back up and we're going to say family and medical leave. And note, we have some legal phrases, suggested questions, but then we also have specific documents. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the actual FMLA, Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993. And notice that rather than actually running a search, what it's done is it's taken me to the act. Remember, when you're looking at an act, it's actually a compilation of statutes, right? So Congress passed this act, but this act is made up of a whole bunch of different statutes. So this one is 2601, but if we keep going down further, you'll see additional statutory sections, 2612. So this is, yes, the information we're looking for, but maybe not delivered in the way we want. So I'm going to go back to the original screen we were looking at. And what I want to counsel you to do is come over here and just say, view references to Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993. What this is going to do is it's going to bounce you out of the act, so that public law as it was passed by Congress, and instead it's going to run a search of the terms. And we're going to go to secondary materials. And once we're at secondary materials, we're kind of going to narrow it however you want to do it. So we can come over here and we can say, I really want to find a good treatise on point. So it'll bring our results down to treatises, or you can say law review and journals, however you want. And then we're going to narrow it down to jurisdiction. And when we're doing something like the FMLA, which is federally based, I like to make sure I come over to jurisdiction and select two things. I'm going to select multiple. I want non-jurisdictional and I want U.S. federal. We're going to say, okay. And that way we get a more meaningful sampling, if you will, because, of course, the actual federal stuff, but then we have this non-jurisdictional stuff that can be really helpful as well. So this is looking pretty good. So labor and employment law, wage and hours, labor and employment FMLA regulations. We could go ahead and jump into this resource. Or what's even more effective is we can come here and say view table of contents. And what's so nice about this is it's going to take us to the table of contents. It's going to show us where this is, but also provide all the other information. So we actually see the way this is broken down. It's broken down by subject. So we can go and find the most relevant subject. We have FMLA forms. We have all the FMLA regulations. We could dive into those and see exactly what it has to say about the law. We could also search within that table of contents as well to dive in and see exactly what's going on with the FMLA. All right. So we'll find a couple of 3 or 4, and there's a checklist on the very last page of the handout that I've sent you. But we can go ahead and, you really want to get about 3 or 4, really until you feel comfortable with those secondary sources that are going to explain the law. And then we're going to move on to our primary authority. Now remember, of course, that we've already gotten some of the primary authority, right? Because we use the footnotes in those secondary sources. But now we're going to move on to statutes and regulations, or statutes and legislation, sorry. So that S of SRAC. And we can come here, once we're at statutes and legislations, if it's not already kind of delineated like it is here, we may want to go in and say codes. So we actually are looking at only codified statutes. And we also might want to narrow down to U.S. federal. But this list is already pretty meaningful because it's pre-populating our results up to the top. Now, one other kind of cheat, if you will, that I want to highlight for you is remember with the United States Code, they're broken down by title. So Title 29 is on labor. So I know for my purposes, I'm looking for Title 29. So when I come in here and I see Title 5, for my purposes, that's not important because I'm dealing with labor issues. So I don't really care about government organization and employees, even though there is some bearing on this statutory section for the FMLA, because remember, it can impact any number of statutes. For my purposes, I'm only focusing on these Title 29. All right, so let me go ahead and open up findings and purpose. So this is the pre-populate up. And this is going to kind of follow the basic schematic of almost all acts, right? So I'm going to open up the table of contents to show you how these are laid out. So findings and purpose is usually the very first part of any statutory schematic. That basically lays out why Congress felt like this was an area that should be legislated. And then, if you look down here, you'll usually have definitions right after that. Sometimes you'll have even more definitions. And then you're going to have your meat and potatoes. And it's really tempting to stop there, but I really want to caution you to keep digging down a little deeper, because if you keep going down further, you're going to find your special rules, your exemptions, your limitations, and those may apply. So once you find your meat and potatoes, don't forget to keep on digging through the rest of that kind of statutory schematic to make sure that you have grabbed all the sections that apply to your factual scenario. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump in to the meat and potatoes. So in general, you're entitled to leave for 12 weeks during any 12-month period in Part C in order to care for a spouse, son, daughter, parent of the employee if such spouse, son, daughter, or parent has a serious health condition. So this is the section that we're really focusing on, specifically in order to care for. So is traveling with mom to Las Vegas, is that caring for? And we have a couple of things that are going to help guide us in this. The first thing is, if we come over here, anytime that you see topic summaries, I'm going to really caution you to go ahead and take a look at those. The reason I like to look at these is, A, they're free, which is nice, right? So even when you're in a firm this summer and you're using an ID that may cost money because it's a firm ID, these are always going to be free, but also they provide a plethora of content. So the default is U.S. federal, but if you're looking for a different jurisdiction, you can come over here and select it. Definitions, seminal cases, elements. If you scroll down further, you get secondary sources, burden of proof, standard of review. Sometimes it can be really difficult to find the standard of review, but right there she is. All right, let's go back. The next thing we're going to go to is our case notes. So if we come to case notes, it's going to give you this really nice topical breakdown of how courts have construed this statute. Specifically, if you look at 7, what constitutes care? So this is our specific factual issue. If we come down here, it's a nice little sampling of case law that has applied our particular factual issue, case or care, in relation to the statute. We can get even more precise by coming here and saying search document, and we can say travel within the same sentence as care for, and run the search. Well, maybe that was too, let's do care like this. See if we come up with something. So travel within the same sentence as care, cared for, caring is what that. So basically this is like a control F on steroids. And what this will now allow us to do is jump around within the document looking for where leave and travel and care are in that same sentence, or care and travel rather. And sure enough, we get some pretty nice sampling of case law, and we can jump around and look at all the sections that talk about travel to care for an employee. All right. Now, before we leave this statute, we need to look over here and shepherdize. And sure enough, we see that red exclamation point. We see there's a problem. So let's go ahead and click this shepherdize this document. And once we shepherdize this document, we actually want to get more specific. Because yes, some part of it's unconstitutional, but 4,900 cases is just too many to dig through. So we're going to come here and we're going to say subsection reports by specific court citation. And we're going to scroll down. It's going to break down the Shepard's report to specific subsections. And if we come here, we were looking at A1C, right? So that's our specific section. And we see that green plus. So remember I said if you see that green plus, it tells you A, there is no negative history on it. A1C is clear, but it also is letting you know some other opinions have followed it. So for our purposes, A1C, good to go. It has been validated. But if we come down here at A1D, we actually see that's the part that has the constitutional issue, A1D. So let's go ahead and select A1C, and that's going to bring us down to the Shepard's report only for that specific subsection. And now we're going to do the second reason we shepherdize, which is to find additional, more contemporary, more authoritative word on the topic. So we can come here, we can narrow down to our jurisdiction, or we could break this down real factually, and we're just going to say travel within the same, let's say same paragraph this time as care for. And you know what? I'm actually going to take care and do that root expander. So we're finding care, caring, cared for. We're going to bring those opinions down to 49. So a lot more manageable. Then we can narrow down to our specific jurisdiction and get a pretty comprehensive and really fine tailored results list on case law. Then of course we can find those cases kind of meeting our factual scenario and cite to those in our brief.